Take a pit stop for all things NASCAR with the Four Tire Change podcast. Here is your host, Dawson Iserlo.
What's going on, guys? Thanks for tuning in to the first episode here of the Four Tire Change podcast. Last week, had a lot of fun doing it and got a lot of great feedback. Hopefully you continue to leave a comment, subscribe, and be a part of the Four Tire Change family. This week, another great episode, something special for you. Sat down with Chris Fusaro, who was my former co-host of this podcast. Again, the first iteration of it that happened a couple years back. So got to talk to him, and we played a little bit of a game with some of the off-season predictions and storylines called Gas It Up or Pump the Brakes. Basically, I gave a storyline to him, he gave one to me, and we would each kind of say whether we agree with that or think maybe that's going a little bit too far. So that was this week. Coming up this week in NASCAR is the Clash at the Coliseum. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's essentially NASCAR's big exhibition race. Think preseason in the NFL. They're going to LA, the Coliseum. That's right, the football stadium where the USC Trojans play, turned into a NASCAR track for 1 week out of the year here. It's been a lot of fun. They've been doing this for a couple of years now in the Coliseum. And me and Chris didn't spend a ton of time on it because it's not really our favorite event. It is an exhibition race. It doesn't count, but it is a great, it's the first chance to see the new drivers in their new cars, see the teams out on the track. And, for those in Los Angeles, I think NASCAR, the goal here is to kind of try and grow the sport a little bit more. So it will be cool. I will be paying attention to it, but not going to take a whole lot of conclusions from it because there's also really not any other tracks in NASCAR that really run like that. So I don't even know if you can get much out of it, but somebody's going to win it, and maybe they'll have a little bit of buzz because of that. So that is coming up. And without further ado, here's my interview, or my conversation rather, with Chris Fusaro. Christopher Fusaro, the man who was originally the co-host of this podcast, is going to basically be the co-host here. We're going to have Chris on plenty of times now. First of all, Chris, great to be back.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the friends at ESPN Southwest Louisiana for allowing me to be on.
Absolutely, and kind of revitalizing this thing. So for some of you who may remember the original iteration, Chris and I started this thing a few years back and really had some good progress with it. Eventually had to kind of slow things down for a bit, but we're back and rolling. And so Chris is going to join us, maybe not every week, but certainly a lot throughout the season to keep checking in. And we wanted to start off the year by kind of playing a little bit of a game that has to do with kind of predictions. It is Clash Week. Both Chris and I kind of talked. It's not our favorite event on the NASCAR schedule, but it does kick off the season. So I will start by, I guess, asking your thoughts of this weekend. They're back at the LA Coliseum. Are you expecting much? What do you want to gain out of this weekend, Chris, when you watch the Clash?
I would say essentially that nobody decides to not watch the Daytona 500 because of what they'll see in LA.
There you go. Not discouragement. That's a good bar.
Yeah, some positivity. It's not very indicative of what you'll see the rest of NASCAR season. I think it's very gimmicky, a little fluky, and it's something that is a very made for TV event. But I don't even know if it's that enjoyable watching on TV.
Yeah, no, and I get it. And, I think it was a good idea when it was started to go to LA and to do what they did. And, they've decided to keep it there. And at least there's enough interest and buzz that they have felt like it's necessary to keep it there. So I am intrigued to at least see what it looks like, get to see the cars back in action. We'll see drivers that are in new places for the first time here kind of make their first impact. So that will be this weekend. But the main focus of what we wanted to do is play a game here that kind of discusses some of the offseason storylines that I brought into play last week, but also kind of, takes maybe some of the trending buzzy storylines and puts to the test whether we think they're legit or not. So we're going to call it here, Gas It Up or Pump the Brakes, essentially how it's going to work. I will present him a few questions. He'll present me some as well. And the answer will be either Gas It Up. Yeah, I agree with that storyline. I do think that's going to be the case. Or Pump the Brakes. Maybe not. We're not quite buying in yet. So I'll start with one for you, Chris, and we can, start with Stewart-Haas because, I talked about it last week. I think they're on a slippery slope, and I'm really kind of concerned with what they're doing moving forward. They bring in a couple of drivers in the offseason. They bring in Noah Gragson. Like, how does that mesh? Josh Berry as well, kind of unproven at the Cup level. So my first one to you is that Stewart-Haas, who, largely has been considered at least one of the power teams, if not, not one of the best, but right there with your Gibbses and your Hendricks of the world. I say they will be considered more like Spire than they are Gibbs by the end of this season. Do you gas it up or pump the brakes there?
Gas it up. And I don't know if it has as much to do with Stewart-Haas as it does with Spire, to be honest. I think there's a lot more ground that has been gained there than what Stuart Haas will lose. I think if this was 2020, 2021, where Kevin Harvick was winning multiple races, I would say it was more on the Stuart Haas side of things. But he didn't win a race last year. It was very tough sledding for that entire program. So I think it says more about Spire. It maybe says more about Corey LaJoie as a whole, as well as the money that they're putting into the truck series level too, with the purchase of Kyle Busch Motorsports. I think they might be building something there.
There you go. No, and I mostly agree with what you're saying. I do think, though, it is a fall from grace for Stuart Haas that I'm kind of concerned about. But with that being said, your first one for me.
Stuart Haas Racing sells a charter after the 2024 NASCAR season.
Yeah, and I'll gas this up as well. I just think with what they've done now, there was some speculation that this might happen last year. I will say selling and buying of charters is pretty complex, and I don't even pretend to understand all that financially kind of goes into these decisions because, sometimes it feels like with Rick Ware, it's been, maybe made more sense just to keep cars out there running 36 than it did to sell and get out. Now, eventually that they did at least sell one, Rick Ware did, but I think it's going to prove for Stuart Haas to be a valuable decision to probably just try to condense things down a little bit if they want to compete, maybe pour a little bit more of their resources into the guys they have, which, by the way, makes it really important for the four that they do have under contract right now to all kind of show out this year, because you might be competing for 3 jobs next season if that is where it goes. Now, look, maybe they have a lot of success this year and Josh Berry flashes and wins a race and Chase Briscoe has a resurgence. And if that happens, then maybe that's not the case. But for now, yeah, I'll go ahead and have to agree. I think they might have to do something like that at the end of the season. So I'll go next for you. My second one, Ryan Blaney will have an even better overall year in 2024 than he will in his championship year of 2023.
A little bit of gas it up and pumping the brakes. I think gassing it up would be the statistics and numbers wise. I think he will win more races. He'll have more top 5s, he'll have more top 10s. I'm going to pump the brakes. I don't think he'll repeat as the champion. So a little bit of both in there. Statistically speaking, Ryan Blaney will compete for a regular season title. He'll win 2, maybe 3+ races, which is more than he won the regular season last year. So a little bit of both there.
Fair enough. And I did mean, I think that's a good way to answer the question. And I don't think he has to win a championship, honestly, to have a better, kind of somewhat more consistent year this year.
No, definitely not. And I think that's part of maybe backing up his championship a bit. I think some NASCAR fans felt a little, not threatened by the playoff system with that win, but they felt like he sort of skidded by and really used the playoff system to his advantage to win a title. So maybe he can win, 4 or 5 races this year that really proves his worth there.
Fair enough.
All right, next one for me. Noah Gragson proves that he's a NASCAR Cup Series level driver.
I'll pump the brakes here. Look, I've never been the biggest fan of Noah. Some of that had to do with the way he carried himself in the Xfinity Series, although I've kind of had that conflicting argument of that I think he's good for the sport, and I think his personality can kind of, create good things for NASCAR in general. But at the same time, last year was really concerning for me. I thought he was going to do at least well enough to show some signs. Now, of course, he had the whole off-the-track incident, which, we won't get into now, but that clearly derailed part of it. But it wasn't like he was having a good season before then because, we've seen teams in the past, be willing to work through drivers' issues off the track if they're producing on it. But ultimately, his team felt that it was necessary to move on from him. And when you have a teammate like Eric Jones, who didn't necessarily set the world on fire, but certainly was more competent in what we deem to be similar, if not the same equipment, that's concerning for me. And he's going to Stuart Haas, which we just already kind of issued all the, things that are concerning there about Stuart Haas's racing operation. So do I think he has the talent to be a guy that really, steps into a bigger role and a more consistent level at the Cup Series? Yeah. But do I think this is the year? No, because I think Stuart Haas is going to struggle in general. And I don't know if I believe in Gragson enough to pull them out of their struggles regardless.
No, I agree. And I think, his success at the Xfinity level was, looking back on it, sort of stunning, looking at the way that Legacy Motor Club looked last year with them. But maybe that was sort of a 1 foot in, 1 foot out thing with Legacy and their move to Toyota away from Chevy. And maybe it was a little bit of, Chevy not supporting them. And especially with a young driver, you really need that support. So to be continued on the story of Noah Gragson, but no, I'm not very encouraged either.
So my next one is about Corey LaJoie, who I kind of picked as my underfunded breakout driver here. And I guess underfunded is not a great term. I probably need to come up with a better term that describes the difference between the power teams, your Gibbs and Hendricks and the rest. But this one is Corey LaJoie will emerge as a playoff contender in 2024.
Pump the brakes, and I'll say one thing, and I'll liken it to Michael McDowell, who I know you love, and you love his story. Until you see speed on non-super speedways, I don't know if you can be taken seriously as a complete team, as a complete driver. I do think Corey LaJoie has potential. Spire Motorsports shown speed on super speedways. Until you see it week in and week out on intermediates, short tracks, I think we finally saw that from Michael McDowell last year. Even though he didn't advance past the first round of the playoffs, you felt like there was a chance, right? If Corey LaJoie were to sneak in the playoffs, if he won a super speedway, you wouldn't really give him too much of a chance to advance. So I would say pump the brakes, but the potential for gas it up if they show speed on non-super speedways.
Fair enough. It's fair enough.
Next one, Chase Elliott wins multiple races in 2024.
Yeah, gas it up without much hesitation, too. And this will kind of go in tow with my last question for you. But I think that this is a big year for Chase. What happened to Hendrick last year was pretty strange. And they're kind of in a title drought, so to speak, right? 2 years now, whatever, without a title, which Hendrick standards are a little different than the rest of the sports standards. But I mean, I don't know if you could have had a weirder set of circumstances last year. And after what Kyle Larson had been through the years before, it felt like for him to have the most normal season, maybe, of any of their drivers last year. That was interesting. William Byron was right there as well with him. But ultimately, sometimes in this new format, it comes down to what you can do at Phoenix. And I guess the bigger concern for Hendrick and for me is the fact that they don't feel like they ever have the best car at Phoenix in the championship race. Maybe that's a little bit being a prisoner of the moment because it hasn't been that long since they captured the title themselves. But I do think, with all that being said, that Chase is due for a bounce back year. He's too talented. The sport needs him. We know that. He's the most popular driver by far, and he has been for, working on a decade now. So I do think he bounces back. I think he wins multiple races without a doubt. And I think he's going to be right there in the championship contention. And based on what happened last year, kind of some of the questions that he had and people questioning where his priorities were based on his injury and what he was doing, skiing or whatever, I think he's out to kind of prove something this year. So I don't have a lot of doubts that Chase is going to get it done. So let's go one more each here. And I'll have one for you. And it kind of lines up right with that one, as I mentioned. 10 or fewer drivers will win a regular season race in 2024, because the reason I asked this is when we started with, what the new next gen car looked like, the parity was crazy. There was more than 16 winners. We had all this, controversy about the playoffs and things like that. Last year, it started to level off a little bit. And I'm wondering if that kind of continues into an incline where, the teams with the most funding and resources tend to rise back to the top here. That's kind of part of what goes into my answer about Chase Elliott. So I'll ask you if you think less than 10 drivers total get a race win in the regular season.
Pump the brakes. Heavily pump the brakes here. 14 or 15 winners. I still think the parity exists with the next gen car. I think it may level off a bit. We may get some back end winners, but I genuinely think that there will be 14, maybe 15 winners in the regular season.
No, and I wouldn't be shocked there either. I just wonder where that balance of kind of, your bigger teams mixed with your up and comers comes into play. So what's the last one you have for me?
This sort of feeds in the same area, but this one may not have playoff implications. So drivers could get in on points, 3 or 4 drivers. If this scenario happens and a non-playoff eligible driver wins in the regular season.
Yeah, so I'll say gas it up. I do think we have this, and we saw it last year with Shane Van Gisbergen, which, that was an incredible feat at the Chicago Street Course, and that kind of, earned him a couple more chances here we're going to see coming up. But I think drivers like himself, with AJ Allmendinger, going back into Xfinity full time, but he's going to be around for at least a handful of these races with Colleague, who I think announced today Josh Williams is going to be behind the wheel of their 16 car here coming up, which is kind of a surprise, but pretty exciting for a guy like Josh, who's been trying to, fight for some better chances in the series. I think with the nature of some of those specialists coming in, and, look, we're going to still see with Trackhouse and, the Project 97 stuff that they've brought in some drivers, and I know they already have some plans this year. Jimmy Johnson is going to race several times this year for Legacy. All those being considered, I think somebody finds a way to get one that's not a playoff eligible driver, which again, it's interesting. It does and doesn't impact the playoffs. Like you kind of mentioned there, it's not like it takes a spot away and reserves it for somebody who's not in the race, but it does limit an opportunity for a contender to either A, get in, or B, improve their standing there. And it's always fun to see how those non-championship drivers compete and how aggressive they are. But I will say, gas it up. I do think somebody wins a race here that's not going for the championship in this season. So that's a lot of fun, Chris. I appreciate you jumping on here. We're going to probably get on together again, either before or after Daytona. We'll see how the schedules line up, whether it's going to be previewing or recapping. But all in all, I'm excited for the season, excited to have you back in the mix here, and should be a fun year for Four Tire Change.
Thanks, Dawson. Appreciate it.